A 4-year-old orphan boy is abandoned in a crowded mall bathroom, but a millionaire found him there, and what she did shocked everyone. Comment. Giving a score from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The men's restroom at the busiest shopping mall in the sprawling metropolis of Chicago was nearly empty on that rainy Tuesday afternoon when she mistakenly pushed open the heavy door. The 30-year-old millionaire, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer dress that cost more than many people earned in a year, was desperately searching for her Italian leather handbag, a Bottega Veneta that she'd misplaced while shopping. Her high-heeled shoes echoed against the cold ceramic floor as she checked every stall, annoyed by her own absent-mindedness. The businesswoman, who owned a chain of upscale boutiques, had always been meticulous about her belongings, especially that bag, which contained important documents for a multi-million-dollar deal she was closing the next day. That's when she heard a muffled sob coming from the last stall, almost imperceptible amidst the sounds of the mall. She approached slowly, her perfectly shaped eyebrows furrowed, and found a sight that left her completely paralyzed. Huddled in the darkest corner, between the toilet and the dirty wall, was a 4-year-old boy who looked no older than 2, so small and frail he looked like a discarded doll. His torn and mud-caked clothes clung to his thin body, and his large, frightened eyes stared at her like those of a wounded animal expecting another blow. The woman felt her heart pound. She'd never had children, always focused on building her business empire, but something in that desperate look hit her like a punch to the gut. The boy was trembling uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from a deep fear she'd never seen in a child. "Hey, little guy." Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Are you okay?" The boy shrank back even further, trying to become invisible. There were purple marks on his skinny arms, and she realized he hadn't eaten in days, judging by the protruding bones visible through his pale skin. Without a second thought, she took off her wool coat and wrapped it around the child, who initially resisted, but was too weak to fight. The smell of neglect and dirt made her gasp, but she didn't pull away. She took out her phone and cancelled all her meetings for the day. "Let's get you out of here," she said, lifting the boy into her arms. He weighed less than her gym bag. "You need food and a hot bath." During the drive to her mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, the boy didn't say a word. He just stared out the window of the luxury car as if it were the first time he'd seen the world. She called her housekeeper and asked her to prepare the guest room without explaining why. The imposing 3-story house, with perfectly manicured gardens and a pool that looked more like a resort, contrasted sharply with the child's miserable state. She took him straight to the bathroom of the master suite and carefully began to give him a warm bath. That's when she saw the extent of the injuries. They weren't just scratches from a playful child, they were deliberate marks, belt scars, and cigarette burns that told a story of horror that no child should ever experience. Tears streamed down her face without her realizing it. As she carefully washed each wound, the boy began to relax for the first time, closing his tired eyes. She dressed him in one of her t-shirts, which hung on him like a dress, and took him to the kitchen. She prepared a simple soup, watching as he devoured each spoonful as if it were his last meal. Between bites, he looked at her suspiciously, as if expecting her to disappear or change her mind about helping him. "Oh, what's your name?" she asked softly. The boy didn't answer, just kept eating. She realized he wasn't talking, maybe because of trauma or because he'd never had anyone to talk to. That night, she put him to sleep in the guest room, but he woke up screaming several times. Terrible nightmares made him sweat and cry, calling out for people who clearly weren't coming to save him. She spent the night by his bedside, holding his cold little hand and singing songs that her own mother used to sing when she was little. The next day, while the boy slept peacefully for the first time in a long time, she started making calls. She needed to find out where he'd come from and how she could officially help him. But when she called social services, the answer chilled her to the bone. A child matching that description had disappeared 3 days ago from a shelter on the outskirts of the city. The boy was considered problematic and aggressive, according to the records, and the institution was desperate to find him before the scandal broke. Her heart sank as she realized she'd gotten involved in something much more complicated than she'd imagined. But when she looked at the boy sleeping peacefully for the first time, nestled between soft pillows and clean blankets, she knew she couldn't simply return him to that terrible place. That's when her personal assistant arrived for the morning meeting and found the child in the living room. The 30-year-old man, always impeccably dressed and with a calculated smile, widened his eyes at the scene. She immediately noticed that something had changed in his expression, a dangerous glint she'd never noticed before. "Well, well," he said slowly, taking his phone out of his pocket. "This is interesting. Very interesting indeed." The personal assistant slowly circled the room, observing every detail of the scene with calculating eyes. The boy had woken up at the strange presence and hid behind the millionaire's legs, clinging to the expensive fabric of her skirt as if she were his only protection in the world. "Let me guess," he said, adjusting his silk tie with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You found this abandoned child and decided to play the Good Samaritan. How touching." The businesswoman felt a chill run down her spine. She'd known this man for 5 years, since he started working for her as an ambitious young business school graduate. He'd always been efficient, almost indispensable in managing her business, but she'd never seen this cold expression on his face. "It's none of your business," she replied firmly, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "And I expect this to remain between us." He chuckled softly, an unpleasant sound that echoed through the luxurious room. "Oh, but it is my business, very much my business, in fact." He took his phone out of his pocket and started typing something. "Do you have any idea what you've done? This child is wanted for kidnapping. You are officially a criminal now." Her blood ran cold. "He was abandoned, suffering. I didn't kidnap him. I saved him." "Try explaining that to the police," he said, showing her the phone screen with an online news article. 4-year-old boy missing from charitable institution. Desperate family asks for help to find him. What a tragedy, isn't it? She took the phone with trembling hands and read the article. The photo showed the boy, but cleaner and smiling, clearly doctored. The text described a child loved by everyone, suddenly disappeared from a model shelter that received praise from the community. It was all a lie. "This isn't true," she whispered, looking at the boy trembling beside her. "You saw his condition, the marks, the injuries." "I didn't see anything," he replied coldly, "and if you don't want me to make an anonymous call reporting the whereabouts of the child, I suggest we talk about the terms of my discretion." Reality hit her like a slap in the face. Blackmail. Her own employee, someone she'd trusted with the most intimate secrets of her company, was blackmailing her. "How much?" she asked, her voice hoarse. $2 million, he said without hesitation. "Transferred to an offshore account by noon tomorrow, and a substantial raise in my salary, let's say $500,000 a year." Her legs buckled, and she leaned against the leather armchair. $2 million was an amount that would seriously shake her investments, especially with the company expansion she was planning. But the prospect of losing the boy to that horrible place was much worse. "And if I pay, you guarantee you'll keep quiet?" He smiled again, that smile that now made her nauseous. "I guarantee it, at least for now." The implicit threat was clear. It would only be the beginning. That afternoon, after the assistant left with the promise to return the next day to formalize the agreement, she locked herself in her office and started moving her financial assets. Her stock market holdings would need to be liquidated quickly, even at a loss. Part of her Bitcoin reserves would have to be converted. compromising her long-term investment strategy. The boy spent the whole day clinging to her, as if sensing the danger. He still wasn't talking, but his big eyes showed a surprising intelligence for his age. When she cried in frustration over the financial papers, he brought his teddy bear and placed it in her lap. At night, while she was preparing dinner, the intercom rang. It was the front desk, announcing that a woman wanted to speak to her about a lost child. The millionaire's heart pounded. She told the doorman that she wasn't receiving visitors, but through the security cameras she could see a lady of approximately 60 years old, formally dressed, waiting outside the condo. The woman stood there for 2 hours, pacing back and forth, occasionally shouting something that the cameras didn't capture the audio of. When she finally left, she left a business card with the doorman. "Director of St. Francis House, caring for our children with love." That night, the boy had even worse nightmares. He woke up screaming and sweating, but this time he managed to stammer a few words. "No, back, no door, hurts so much." She rocked him until he fell back asleep, but his words echoed in her mind. What kind of place was that shelter that caused such deep terror in such a small child? The next morning, she decided to investigate on her own. She hired a discreet private investigator and asked for a full report on St. Francis House. Meanwhile, she transferred the money demanded by the assistant, watching her bank account dwindle painfully. When he arrived to confirm the payment, he brought a document that alarmed her even more. It was a non-disclosure agreement, meticulously drafted, that obligated her to pay a monthly maintenance fee of $50,000 for the rest of her life. "You're insane," she said, tearing up the paper. "I'm not going to accept being extorted forever." "Then maybe you'd prefer to explain to the authorities how a millionaire businesswoman kidnapped a helpless child," he replied, already dialing a number on his cell phone. "Hello, police. I'd like to report—" "Stop!" she shouted, snatching the phone from his hand. The boy started crying, scared by the shouting. Okay, I'll sign." But as she signed each page, with hands trembling with rage, a steely determination grew in her chest. She wouldn't allow this man to ruin her life or the boys. Somehow, she would find a way out. What she didn't know was that, at that very moment, the director of the shelter was in a meeting with influential lawyers, planning a smear campaign that would destroy her reputation publicly, and that her ex-husband, the lawyer who had always despised her for her humble origins, had just received an anonymous call with very interesting information about her recent activities. The trap was closing around her faster than she imagined, and the little orphan who was sleeping peacefully in her arms was both her salvation and her condemnation. 3 weeks later, the millionaire's life had turned into a constant nightmare. The ex-husband had appeared at the door of her mansion on a Sunday morning with a venomous smile that she knew all too well. The lawyer, always impeccably dressed in expensive suits that contrasted with his cruel personality, hadn't wasted any time in making his intentions clear. "So it's true," he said, sitting down uninvited on the living room armchair. "My ex-wife has become a child kidnapper. What an impressive decline." The boy, who had started to feel safer in the house, immediately hid behind the sofa when he saw the man. Even without knowing him, the child seemed to sense the toxic energy he emanated. "What do you want?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the growing terror in her chest. "Justice," he replied, opening a folder full of documents. "I'm filing a motion to take temporary control of your assets, alleging mental incapacity. After all, what sane person would kidnap a child? Clearly you need psychiatric help." The pages spread across the coffee table like cards in a cruel game. Falsified medical reports, bribed witnesses, fabricated evidence. He'd built a solid case that would paint her as an unbalanced woman who posed a danger to herself and others. "Your businesses, your fortune, your investments, everything will pass to my administration while you receive the appropriate treatment in a specialized institution," he continued, savoring each word. The boy, of course, will go back where he belongs. She felt the world spin around her. Losing her company was terrible, but losing the boy would be devastating. In just 3 weeks, that fragile child had become the center of her universe. Seeing him smile shyly for the first time, hearing him murmur, "Thank you," after dinner, feeling his thin arms wrap around her neck in search of protection, all of that had changed something fundamental inside her. "You have 48 hours to voluntarily transfer custody of the child and sign the business transfer papers," he said, standing up. "Otherwise, I'll make this public and much more humiliating for you." After he left, she collapsed to the floor of the living room, sobbing uncontrollably. The boy came out from behind the sofa slowly, and for the first time it was he who consoled her, placing his small hand on her tear-streaked face. "Don't cry," he said, with his childish voice still hoarse from so much screaming. "Bad man gone." That night she barely slept. The situation was completely out of control. The assistant continued to drain her resources monthly. The director of St. Francis House had started a smear campaign that was affecting her boutiques, and now the ex-husband was threatening to take everything. Her profits had plummeted 40% in the last month. Important clients were cancelling contracts. Suppliers were demanding upfront payments, and the press was starting to ask uncomfortable questions about her personal life. Her stock market holdings were plummeting daily, and she was forced to sell more assets to keep the company afloat. That's when the private investigator brought disturbing information about St. Francis House. The detailed report revealed serious irregularities. Children kept in subhuman conditions, severe physical punishments, embezzlement of funds destined for food and medical care. But the most shocking discovery was that the director had built a pattern of losing problematic children, especially those who could testify against her methods. 15 children have disappeared in the last 2 years, explained the detective, showing photos and documents. All reported as runaways, but the circumstances are suspicious. Some were found days later in deplorable conditions, others were never seen again. Her blood ran cold as she realized the boy could have been one of those statistics. His runaway hadn't been accidental. It was a desperate attempt at survival. That week, the pressure increased exponentially. The director of the shelter appeared on a talk show, shedding crocodile tears and describing how an innocent child had been snatched from a loving home by an unbalanced woman with maternal obsessions. The performance was so convincing that it generated a wave of public outrage. Protests began to happen in front of her boutiques. Loyal customers of years crossed the street to avoid passing near her establishments. Sales plummeted to almost zero, and she was forced to temporarily close 3 of the 5 branches to cut costs. The boy, realizing the constant tension, began to regress. He started having nightmares every night again, stopped talking again, and refused to leave the room. He constantly drew haunted figures, huge adults with distorted faces chasing a small child who was hiding in dark corners. The worst moment came when she discovered that the assistant wasn't working alone. During a tense meeting in her office, he let slip a crucial piece of information that left her in shock. "My sister is worried about the delay," he said casually, while reviewing the latest bank statements. She expected this to be resolved more quickly. "Your sister?" He realized the mistake immediately, but it was too late. Well, let's just say I have a personal interest in seeing this situation resolved the right way." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with terrifying clarity. The assistant and the director were siblings. It had all been planned from the beginning. They hadn't chosen the boy randomly. They had chosen her, a rich, lonely woman without close family, perfect to be manipulated and extorted. The plan was simple and cruel. Use a vulnerable child to awaken her maternal instincts, then turn her compassion into a financial and legal trap. The ex-husband was just another piece in the game, probably attracted by the promise of a slice of her fortune. "You planned everything," she whispered, her voice laden with horror and anger. "You used a child as bait." He smiled coldly. "And it worked perfectly. You became attached to the boy exactly as we predicted. Now you're willing to pay any price to keep him, aren't you?" That night, while watching the boy sleep restlessly, she made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't run anymore or try to negotiate. If she wanted to save the child and her own life, she would have to go on the offensive. But first, she needed an advantage that her enemies didn't expect. And maybe she'd found it in the last document of the detective's report. Information about a former employee of the shelter who had been fired for trying to report the irregularities. The man now worked as a night security guard at a hospital on the outskirts of the city, but he'd kept evidence for years, waiting for an opportunity to expose the truth. Maybe the time had come for that evidence to come to light. While she was planning her next steps, a noise in the kitchen alerted her. The boy had woken up and was trying to prepare something for her to eat, spilling milk and breaking a plate in the process. When she went downstairs and found him crying in frustration amidst the mess, he said between sobs, "I wanted to make food for you. You always make it for me." In that moment she knew that no matter what happened, she would fight to the end for that child who, unknowingly, had become not only her son at heart, but her greatest reason to keep living. The former employee of the shelter agreed to meet her at a discreet diner on the outskirts of the city. The 60-year-old man, with grey hair and tired eyes, carried an old backpack that held like a treasure the documents that could change everything. "I worked there for 10 years, he said, sipping his lukewarm coffee. "I've seen things that make me wake up screaming to this day. That woman is a monster, but she has powerful protections. Politicians, judges, businessmen. They all received generous donations from the shelter." He opened the backpack and revealed hundreds of photos, medical reports, audio recordings, and financial documents. Injured children, falsified reports, embezzlement of millions in donations. It was enough evidence to shut the place down and arrest everyone involved. "Why didn't you report it?" she asked, flipping through the photos with a sinking stomach. "I tried, 3 times. The reports always disappeared mysteriously, and I received threats. When I finally mustered the courage to go to the press, I found out that my own brother had died in a suspicious car accident." His eyes filled with tears. I understood the message. She copied everything onto flash drives and stored copies in safe deposit boxes at 3 different banks. Now she had ammunition, but she needed a strategy. Her enemies were too powerful for a direct confrontation. The answer came from where she least expected it. The boy, who had been quieter and more observant in recent weeks, did something that left her speechless. During a violent storm that flooded the city streets, she woke up in the middle of the night and realized he wasn't in bed. Desperate, she searched the whole house, calling out his name. The security cameras showed the boy leaving through the kitchen door at 2 in the morning, wrapped only in a coat that was too big for him. What followed were the worst 48 hours of her life. The police refused to help, claiming she didn't have legal custody of the child. The ex-husband appeared with a temporary court order taking control of her assets due to the deteriorated mental state evidenced by the loss of the child under her care. The television news reported the disappearance as "kidnapped child flees captor in search of freedom." The director of the shelter cried on national television, begging for her boy to come home. She lost 15 pounds in 2 days, couldn't eat or sleep. Her oldest employees, women who had worked with her for years, began to doubt her version of the facts. Even her housekeeper quit, afraid of being associated with the scandal. That's when everything changed definitively. The boy was found on a rainy dawn, unconscious in an alley behind a commercial building, just 3 blocks from the shelter. He was injured, with a high fever, but clutched against his chest a plastic folder that he protected as if it were his own life. In the hospital, While the doctors were tending to his injuries, she managed to get a few minutes alone with him before the authorities arrived to take him back to the shelter. "Why did you leave?" she asked, holding his cold little hand. "I was so scared." With eyes still feverish but determined, he whispered, "I got the bad woman's bad papers, so you don't cry no more." The folder contained documents he had stolen from the director's office during his escape. Contracts for the sale of children, for illegal international adoption, records of payments to politicians, proof of secret bank accounts abroad, and the most shocking, a list of preferred clients that included powerful people who adopted children for obscure purposes. But there was something even more revealing, a series of emails between the director, the assistant, and the ex-husband, planning the whole operation against her in the smallest details. They had specifically chosen the boy for his fragile appearance and traumatic history, knowing that it would awaken her maternal compassion. The plan was to extort $2 million initially, then take control of her company and fortune through the mental incapacity process, and finally use her destroyed reputation to expand the scheme to other rich and lonely victims. With the evidence in hand, she didn't waste any time. While the authorities were taking the boy back to the shelter, she was already mobilizing a team of independent lawyers and investigative journalists. Copies of the documents were simultaneously delivered to the district attorney's office, the FBI, and the main newspapers of the city. The scandal exploded like a bomb. In less than 24 hours, the director, the assistant, and 8 other employees of the shelter were arrested. The bank accounts were frozen, the shelter was closed, and the other 43 children who lived there were transferred to legitimate institutions. The ex-husband tried to deny involvement, but the emails were unequivocal. He was arrested for conspiracy, extortion, and fraud. His license to practice law was revoked. When the truth came to light, the same society that had condemned her completely reversed course. Donations began to arrive from all over the country for her company. Clients who had abandoned her returned with apologies. Her shares rose again, and new investors appeared interested in supporting a businesswoman who had sacrificed everything to protect a child. The adoption process, which had previously seemed impossible, was expedited by the very judges who wanted to correct the injustice. In 3 months, she received permanent custody of the boy, who chose as his first official act to give her a name. She would call him simply, "My son at heart." The boy, who had spent the first 4 years of his life knowing only cruelty, began to flourish. He learned to speak without stuttering, started to smile every day, and developed a passion for drawing. His nightmares gradually diminished, replaced by dreams where he flew like a superhero protecting other children. A year later, she was on the balcony of her house, watching the boy play in the garden with the dog they had adopted together, when he ran to her with a drawing in his hands. "Look what I did," he said, beaming. The drawing showed 2 figures holding hands, one big and one small, under a bright yellow sun. "Who are these people?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. "It's us," he said, climbing onto her lap. "The mum who found me, and the boy who found a family." She hugged her son close to her chest, feeling a kind of happiness that she had never imagined possible. Her company had become more prosperous than ever, diversifying its investments and creating a fund to help other children in vulnerable situations. Her wealth had fully recovered, but now she knew that true wealth was in the thin arms that wrapped around her neck. The boy had saved himself by saving her, proving that sometimes the greatest act of courage comes from those who have the least to lose. And she had discovered that protecting someone we love can give us a strength we never knew we possessed. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in golden hues, mother and son remained embraced, knowing that they had found in each other not only a family, but a reason to believe that even in the most desperate circumstances, love always finds a way to triumph.